Hello and welcome to live post-match reaction to the Jaguares versus the Waratahs. And I had a perfect weekend of picking until these last two. And the Jaguares ran out to an easy 38-28 victory in this one. I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, a podcast, YouTube channel, Twitter account, and website bringing you the best in rugby predictions and opinion. And today I'm joined by a Tars fan, Hugh. So how are you doing?
Slightly disappointed Tars fan, actually. How are you? Not
bad at all. I'm a disappointed England fan. For those of you watching the videos can see, I'm still in my England jersey from earlier, where obviously England lost to France in the Six Nations. For those of you who are catching up on scores around the world. So this one, some games take a while to find their feet. This game was from the off. I mean, less than 20 seconds, and the Tars were already 7 points behind.
Yeah, it was an interesting start, actually. The Tars did win that kickoff, but had no one supporting the tap, and the Jaguares took full advantage.
They did, and there was a lot of contestable restarts in this one that went both ways, and with players, as you say, tapping back and then not necessarily their own guy getting it and someone else getting it, and sort of the inevitable chaos ensuing from that. As we saw at the very end, is it time that the kickoff teams actually kept a player deeper, just in case they lose the ball? Because both sides lost tries from kickoffs.
Oh, look, it's definitely been a weakness for the Tars this year, and if you look historically, probably for Australia in the last 12 months as well. So it's something that they probably do need to look at. Obviously it's changed in the last few years, sending up your winger to contest those kickoffs. But if you can't cover your own mistakes, then there's going to be problems.
There is, and mistakes was definitely a key thing in this for the Tars. They got themselves they'll get their hands on the balls next. They got their hands on the balls next, which was good. We saw Beale stepping in to first receiver a lot and switching with Foley. In that first half, and well, not really good effects because they kept breaking down. But he was definitely very busy in getting his hands on the ball, wasn't he?
He was, and it was probably something that was quite pleasing for Tars fans, was that he actually played the full 80 minutes, considering he was carrying what was reported to be a rib injury. So hopefully he comes out unscathed and he's right next week for the big game against the Rebels. One thing that was really obvious early on was that the Tars continually tried to shift the ball wide, and the Jaguares' line speed was just too good. There was very little variety to the Tars' attack. They just kept shifting wide again and again. There were no attacking kicks. Jake Gordon didn't look for a sniping run. Foley didn't really take the line on. As you say, Beale kept shifting it wide as well. And the holes just weren't there. It was something that I thought, thinking about it, the only reason that I could think that they would be employing that game plan after being on the road for 2 weeks and playing in 30 degrees in Buenos Aires was that they were trying to avoid going to the set piece. And that was somewhere that the Jaguares did dominate in the second half.
It was, yes. It was somewhere that they wanted to avoid, understandably. But even when they did find those gaps, and Folau particularly would break the line, it felt at times like Folau would only pass to Foley or Beale, and he didn't trust anybody else with the ball. And this game the Tars game really does revolve around four players: Hooper, Folau, Foley, and Beale, doesn't it?
Absolutely, 100%.
And I think he's got to start trusting the other players to do some things, because at the moment, it does feel like Folau in particular just won't pass to anybody else unless it's one of those. And then when that period of possession didn't pay off, Jaguares got a good break, and their number 8 was going, and unfortunately he ran himself into isolation. He needed to slow himself up there from that break. They got lucky though.
Yeah, look, I thought the Jaguares attack was really controlled very well by Sanchez at 5'8", who is somewhat inconsistent but has certainly performed very well historically for the national team. And Creevy, an inspirational hooker and leader in that team, who just continually got his hands on the ball, whether it was in attack, running with ball in hand, or at the breakdown.
Oh, Creevy had a blinder. I was a couple of tries in before I noted that down in my notes. But Creevy was at the breakdown. He was judging when to go for the ball, when not to go for the ball very well. He created quite a few turnovers, and from memory, I don't remember him giving up many penalties. So to my mind, he had a quick check on the old penalty stats. But on my mind, he was judging that perfectly as to when to go in. No penalties conceded by Creevy. So
plenty to say too, by the look of it.
And that's hookers and captains the world over, isn't it?
Whether he was speaking in English or Spanish, who knows?
I think he's equally versed in both, or this is obviously he's been better in Spanish, but I think his English is very good as well. On that side of things, we definitely did towards the second half get some discipline issues from both sides. It got a bit choppy. But in that first half, I think we only had like 6 penalties, and it was a very clean and flowing game in that first half, which was nice to watch.
It was as well, and I believe the first scrum wasn't set until about the 21st or 22nd minute, which the Waratahs were probably quite pleased about. It was played at a really fast pace, and again, for me, that was somewhat surprising considering the Tars are playing their second game on the road, a lot of travel, and you're playing in 30-degree heat. I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that was the best tactic for the Tars.
No, possibly not. I got a couple of comments in the chat here. Joshua, Argentina won because the team is Argentina. Conky, a test team beat a super side, no surprise. I'm sorry, but no, the Jaguares have lost plenty of games to Super Rugby teams. So saying that's not, whilst that's what a lot of people thought was going to happen 2 years ago when the Jaguares joined the Super Rugby, it hasn't come to fruition, and the Jaguares have lost their opening 2 games. So no, that's definitely not what's going on here. I loved how the 15 played in this game. Twice, so for the second try, he added the extra man on the blind side, and they were more than happy to use the blind side. That created the extra space. There suddenly was an overlap, and they went for a try. I thought that was good.
Tooslade, he's a class player.
Absolutely, and he then broke the line and cut through to go into the posts for the third try as well. And at 16 minutes, 21 points up. This game was basically over at that point and was only going to go one way from there on in. Yeah,
the Tars looked quite shell shocked at that stage, and even probably at that point, you were questioning the game plan. The little mistakes were starting to creep in, possibly a bit of fatigue already as well.
Yep, that's the word. Yeah, I mean, when we're hearing Mitchell say after about like 10 minutes, oh well, some players looking tired out there, you think, wow, hang on, we've hardly started. Having players look tired after 10 minutes is not clever. And sure, it is hot, but then again, games in Australia is hot at this still at the moment, so it's not. Right. There's no excuse from that point of view. And then they added another one as well on 20 minutes. And basically, it wasn't up until this time that the Tars got any had any kind of control of the game. And Sanchez picked up the fourth try and also missed his first kick. Someone who can clearly kick from the left but not from the right so well. So if you're defending against Jaguares, defend stronger on the right than the left. It'll save you 2 points. Is the lesson? Yeah. Lesson learned.
I think it was around that point too that the Tars were given a penalty out in front on about the 22, turned down the shot at goal, kicked for the corner, and gave away a silly penalty for not releasing. Creevy was the man on the spot there who probably forced the penalty. But with the weight of possession and territory clearly in the Tars' favour in that first half, was it the right decision to come away with no points?
Absolutely, but being 26 points down, I can see why they were chasing the game. But they clearly, they then had this period of about 10 minutes where the Tars had the pressure and the territory, but they just didn't get a score, and they needed to get something on the board, as you say, for the morale, if nothing else. Even if it wasn't going to be enough to chase down, they should have got some points there. It felt that Tars were trying too hard already at this point. They were throwing off. There were too many offloads. There were too many knock-ons that weren't on, and that was a problem.
Yeah, I think Folau was guilty of pushing a couple. I think Staniforth had a couple of little loose carries and knock-ons as well. And
an interesting comment in the live chat. This is one of the ones that I was thinking as well. I was going to bring up at some point, but let's diverge here. Again, we're talking about selection and team tactics. Ned Hannigan, I thought he was a 6, not a lock. Is this an injury issue, or a tactical move to get a more mobile pack?
I think it was a tactical move. Whether that will remain in a month or so when Jack Dempsey comes back into the team, or what will happen there, I'm not sure. The Tars pack is supposedly quite mobile. It's certainly quite small and quite light, and that exposes the set piece, I guess. I thought in the first half they were really keen to contest at the breakdown, but weren't that effective, whereas the Jaguares were content to only put 1 or 2 players in the breakdown. And as you noted earlier, Creevy was very good at timing when to commit and when to not commit. That allowed the Jaguares to have a full defensive line, and their line speed was excellent. And when the Tars kept shifting it wide with no variety, it was probably quite easy to shut down.
Yeah, it was. And whilst the pack, Hannigan got through 16 tackles, Staniford 14. There was a name you heard quite a lot. Both locks were quite active. Wells 15, Hooper 11, Holloway 11. They got through a lot of work, but weren't necessarily, to say, that effective at that breakdown. They stopped the players, but they didn't cause the breakdown pieces.
Sorry, going back to the Hannigan thing, I guess the reserve lock on the bench is Nick Palmer, who obviously hasn't played a lot of Super Rugby. So I guess it's perhaps something that's been forced upon them a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's probably why if you've got a lightweight lock, you're not going to have a strong scrum, and that's exactly. that is going to be a problem. So Conke, hopefully that answers your question there. Then the Tars got lucky. Holloway, playing heads up rugby, spots that there's no one at home behind the ruck, picks up and runs over unopposed to get the Tars on the board. But again, it was one of those tries that wasn't made. It was so much as spotting an opportunity, a bit like intercept tries. You can't sort of read too much that there's going to be any more of them coming. And so it still wasn't looking very positive for the Tars at that stage.
Yeah, from memory, it came from a couple of phases after quite a decent scrum, actually. And I think it was probably 5 or 6 phases. I think Paddy Ryan had a good carry, and then, as you say, just opened up for Hannigan. And, credit to him for having eyes up and spotting the opportunity, and went through almost untouched. But, of course, that was all undone a couple of minutes later.
It was, wasn't it? The intercept try and some wheels, definitely, to score on half-time. And that really was a nail in the coffin at 33-7.
It was after the Hannigan try. Things, even though it was somewhat opportunistic, I suppose, things were looking up, and you could see that perhaps the Tars had threatened a comeback in the second half, but to see the ball just shuffled along, and then you could see it coming from a mile away when Foley wound up and threw it straight to him.
He did, and it was something that the Tars trained the Jaguares for. I guess they were playing a lot of that style of rugby during that first half, where they were. But basically, one of the things I've noticed before, and I'm just going to bring up the stats now on passes, is that you basically have Foley and Beale who will pass the ball, and the rest of the backs won't. So it never goes through the hands. So yeah, if we just look at the passing stats, Gordon, scrum half, obviously 101 passes, Foley 42, Beale 24, and then the rest of the backs, Rona 2, Focchetti 4, Newsom 1, Folau 4. Effectively, those other guys just don't pass the ball. So it has to be missed passes because, yeah, they're not allowed to pass. They've been told basically you get the ball and you run. And that's your job, and it's Beale's and Foley's job to decide when you get the ball and when you get to run. Yeah,
and you can see just by watching them play using the eye test that those passes that Foley and Beale are throwing are often long cutout passes. So it makes sense.
So that's basically the Tars game plan, and we've seen that before. The problem today was, I think, with their tackling. The tackling percentages in the first half. I'm not saying that the Jaguares were particularly good at 78%, but the Tars at 68%. That's an appalling level of tackling. If you're going to tackle at that rate at this level, you're going to lose. You're going to lose more games than you win.
Absolutely. And I think from memory, the Jaguares actually haven't been very successful in scoring tries so far in their first few games. But when you're coming up against a team that effectively doesn't tackle, then that's going to change.
It is. Clean breaks were even at 6 and 7, but the Jaguares were better at scrambling back and shutting those down. But the turnovers were 7-12 at half time, which again showed you that A, the Tars weren't tackling, and B, when they did have the ball, they lost it far too frequently.
Mm. I think by the end of the game, territory and possession were actually reasonably even, and the set piece stats were probably reasonably even as well. But it was those turnovers and unforced errors that probably cost the Tars.
Absolutely, and it was as you say, it was very even in a lot of senses on that territory and possession. But in the first half, the Jaguares were down on possession and territory.
Yes.
And actually that they were finding that if they got the ball for more than a couple of phases, they weren't necessarily doing anything with it. They either scored quickly or they didn't score at all. And so I think there was an element of that this wasn't a territory and possession game. This was a execution a game. Different games can go different ways depending on how the teams are going.
Yeah, they were pretty keen to throw it around in that first half as well. I think in the second half, Sanchez kicked a bit more, but in the first half, when they did get the ball, it was often, as you say, it was quick turnover ball or it was counter attack, and they were keen to throw it wide as well, which certainly added to the pace of the game.
Absolutely. Well, you say about the pace of the game. The second half, I thought became very frenetic. In that, especially in that first sort of 10 or so minutes, with both sides having opportunities, either chips through going dead, knocking it on, high balls going up, and there was no flow or control to that second half, especially at the beginning. We saw some absolute wonderful hands from Beale, Hooper, Folau, Gordon to put Rayner in. That was just a sublime little bit of play there.
That was a great try. Down the short side, a good interchange of passes. Folau threw that great ball, and then Gordon with the long pass over the top at the end. It was a great try.
And it's one of those things, we look at those names, again, we've got Hooper, Folau, Beale involved. It's that team of players, or that mini team within a team of players, if they're playing well and they put things together, the team does something. It does feel like like three leading stars and a lot of extras who are there sort of purely supporting cast for them. And maybe I'm being a bit harsh.
Well, if you look at their experience and the number of Wallaby caps, then you're exactly right. And they're the ones who are also in the key positions. So they're the ones that really should be controlling the game.
True. We then saw there were definitely also more penalties in that second half. As I say, we only had about 6 in the first half. We ended up with 17 in total. So there were much more break. There was a much more choppy game. Again, as you said, the first try was only after about 20 minutes, but we ended up having 17. Sorry, not the first try, the first scrum. Yep. We ended up having 17 scrums in this game. So there's lots of breakdowns, lots of chopping and changing in the second half. But also the tackling improved as well. Because the Jaguares finished with 80% and the Tars finished with 82% tackling. So it's kind of like the first half, run free, do what you like. The second half, the defences tightened up, and that's why we saw a lot less scoring in the second half.
The Tars were actually quite resolute at times in that second half, and showed a bit of character when there were those periods that the Jaguares had all the ball inside the Tars 22, and the Tars were actually quite effective a few times at either just tackling and knocking them down, or in the end forcing a penalty or a turnover. So, I mean, it wasn't all bad for the Tars. There are signs there, and again, I know I've said it a few times, but considering it was the second game on the road, it's a lot of travel. You need to take some positives out and look forward to next week. So get a couple of cliches in there.
And there are positives out there. So one of the things we've learned about this Tars side for this season is they will not give up. In the first game, it took a last-minute try to win it. In the second game, it took last minute, a very late score anyway, I think about 4 minutes before the end, to draw against the Sharks. And today, they end up scoring 2 tries in the last 2 minutes of the game, when the game's totally gone and it's totally meaningless. They didn't get themselves a losing bonus point. They didn't stop the Jaguares from getting a try bonus point. It was totally meaningless, but still, they played right up until the end. And yeah, this is a side that won't give in.
Yeah, and look, besides those key players that we've mentioned, like Gordon and Beale and Foley and Flower, there are quite a few players in that squad, not just in the starting 15, but also on the bench, who have very few Super Rugby caps. So you'd hope that they're going to get better for the experience, and towards the end of the season, hopefully start making a bit more of an impact.
Absolutely. Sorry, I need to correct myself here, because it ended up being 6 tries to 4. So that means that the Jaguares missed out on the bonus.
That's right. Yes. So that last try, they did stop them. Yeah.
So that last try did matter in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, but it could have been so different if the break on 67 minutes, lovely intercept. I'm not sure what not Hannigan. I've got the wrong one. The fullback Hegarty. Why he can't tackle a player, because they both ran side by side for about 50 meters. And
gave him 2 cracks at it, and he couldn't make either of them.
But luckily, he slowed him down enough so someone else could, and unfortunately,
Will Miller, I think it was.
Who was the end? Sorry,
Will Miller, I think, right at the end.
That sounds right. Who just forced the knock on, or forced the player to dive just before the line. He knocked it on, and that was harsh. Considering how far he'd run. So there was that anyway. They'd come away with a try soon afterwards, and it was like scrum after scrum after scrum, and we had a period of something like 10 minutes, or sorry, about 5 minutes. We had like scrum after scrum from the Jaguares, and eventually they went over in the corner. But yeah, the Waratahs scrum fell apart at that stage of the game, whereas it had been competitive earlier on.
Yeah, that's right. And it was interesting that the reserve prop Tuaki, who I think was on debut for the Waratahs, was actually brought into the squad specifically for, or the reports that I read said he was brought in specifically to help bolster the scrum, which has obviously been a weak point. But with him, and I think Latu was on at that stage as well, the scrum was anything but steady and secure. So that was disappointing. Can't wait for Kepu to come back and hopefully make a difference to the scrum.
Yeah, that's a problem that all sides are going to have to deal with is injuries and not having that first choice there. I don't think any team's going to get their first choice team out at any stage during the season. So it is. We talk about it a lot, but it is a squad game. Let's drop another cliche in there. And yeah, it is just your third choice players quite often who are going to have to be important, especially in that front row.
Yeah, I think that's one area that the Tars are really lacking, actually, is their depth across the squad. If you look at the halfbacks, especially, I think if we've got Gordon who started, Phipps is out injured. The reserve halfback from last week against the Sharks who came on, I can't remember his name, scored a try near the end. He was injured, so he couldn't play. Rumour is that they asked 2 other halfbacks before actually finding the guy, Nick Duffy, who went over for this game. So you're looking at about your sixth or seventh choice halfback there. You know, a bloke who's plucked from Shoot Shield Club Rugby, basically.
And yes, well, as you say, probably the only one that was the kind of semi-professional player who could get who could get away from being a bricklayer for the week or whatever.
That's right.
Who could get off work for to go on the trip. But yeah, it's a shame when teams are down that far. We do want to be watching the best players and quality rugby all the time, and unfortunately, that's just not going to happen with this. I thought that they were going to be that the Tars weren't going to get those last two because obviously Gordon made a great break just before the end there and got shut down and sort of ran out of ideas and just threw the ball away in the end.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with Gordon's first half. He was part of that very predictable game plan that was spoken about. And the real point of difference between him and Nick Phipps is that Gordon is usually someone that shows more variety in attack and more imagination in attack. But today he was content to just play that Phipps game and just keep shifting it out. And as you say, when he did get that chance there at the end, it was almost like he just didn't know what to do with it.
It was, yeah. And one of the things that Mitchell was saying the whole way through the game on the commentary was that there were too many errors from the Tars, and we saw that towards the end there as well. They did get those two late tries, and as we've said, that shows that they'll battle to the end. But the other point of this that I've just realised I forgot to talk about when we were talking about those tackling stats from the first half. It was also who was missing those tackles, and it basically was the entire back line. Gordon missed 2, Foley missed 2, Rona missed 2, and Focchetti missed 2, and he didn't even make one in the first half. He made 2 in the second half, luckily for him, to improve his stats. But when you've got that many holes across your back line, because all those missed tackles were in the first half as well, you're just too porous, and that's what basically lost them the game.
Yeah, it actually reminded me a little bit of the game between these two teams last year at the Sydney Football Stadium, where people like Sanchez and Landajo, who was their halfback last year, and I'm not saying that they're not good players, but they were made to look like they were the best players in the world at that point, purely because of easy tackles that the Tars backline was missing. And today, again, with those missed tackles, Sanchez was just able to exploit that beautifully.
Yep, and the Jaguares did rack up plenty of missed tackles, and quite a few missed tackles in the backs as well, but it was more evenly spread over the game.
Yeah, and they seemed to be able to better cover up as well. So they'd missed a couple, and the Tars had make a break, but their scrambling and their cover was able to stop the Tars from scoring.
Yep, absolutely, and they definitely scrambled much better in that first half, but in particular. Those are kind of the key points I had from this. Any sort of final words around the game?
I think it's really important that the Tars get home and regroup for what's going to be a very tough but also interesting game next week against the Rebels on Sunday afternoon. I was hoping that both teams would be heading into this one undefeated, but obviously the Tars have got a little bit of work to do. The Rebels will be on a massive high. Hopefully, even though the Tars have lost this one, hopefully there'll still be a big crowd. They only got 11,000 to their opener against the Stormers a few weeks ago, which was very disappointing, especially when you consider that was the only game on in town that week. The NRL hadn't started, the AFL hadn't started. And if the Tars were going in undefeated, you'd hope that would have galvanised a bit more home support for them. But hopefully, as I said, the people still turn up, and there'll be some good matchups there. If you look at across the back lines especially, and throw in people like Murphy for the Rebels, there'll be some real good battles there. Absolutely.
And the Rebels, I've not seen the game yet, but they won against the Brumbies on Friday night, from memory.
Yes,
so they're coming into this as the former Australian team, a bit like the Crusaders went into the Hurricanes game on Friday. And the Hurricanes came back from their tour. So to give you some hope can the Hurricanes beat the Crusaders after coming back from tour? So maybe this is it. This is the Tars coming back from tour. Will defeat the top Australian team on their return home.
The Canes did beat the Jaguares away, though, didn't they?
They did, but they did lose to the Bulls.
Yeah.
So they didn't. They did. They didn't have a perfect tour either.
Mm.
Cool, Hugh. Thank you very much for joining me and chatting all things Tars in particular. Where can people get hold of you during the week for rugby chat?
Yep, Twitter. My handle is hef0909.
Now, anything to do with the airplane behind you, or is it looks like your calls, your pilot's call license or anything?
No, that's just a combination of an old rugby nickname, obviously from my first name, and 09 being that I was a halfback. So that's it.
So a man we can talk to who know all the intricacies of the scrum and can comment on that side of things. Thank you very much for your time. We'll have you back on future shows as well. And I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul. Always up for good rugby chats. Please put your comments below or catch me on Twitter at DrivingMaul. If you're watching the recording on YouTube, my face is there. Please do subscribe, and my latest videos in that box as well. If you're listening on the podcast, then please do subscribe. You're already on the app. Just hit that button and give us a 5-star review. Other stars are available, but why would you want to? And enjoy whatever rugby you're watching next weekend.